stuff about this psychic business.
Then why not get tickets for the Sacred Earth Tour?
Oh, we'll get the tickets. And the books.
To order your first book, Mystic Places, call 1-800-572-6500. Examine it for 10 days. Keep it and pay just $12.99 plus shipping and handling. Other books will follow, one about every other month. Keep only the ones you want. Cancel anytime. Call 1-800-572-6500.
Celebrating a decade of achievement. This is CNN.
Good evening. The savings and loan crisis is being called the worst financial disaster since the Depression. If you want to understand how it happened and who's to blame, then watch S&Ls, The Full Story, which preempts my program tonight. It's been garnering national attention because, as one critic put it, it's clear enough for anyone to understand, and because it broke what became a front-page story about a businessman who'll receive $3.4 billion in federal subsidies, even though he was once indicted. The program first aired as a 5-part series back in June, produced by CNN's new Special Assignment Unit. It's been updated, edited to an hour, and it's still a sorry tale of greed and abuse of taxpayer money.
We'll return in a moment with S&Ls, The Full Story.
I'm using this other long-distance company. Try to call Phoenix, I misdialed Fiji. I call the operator. She says she can't give me instant credit. I say AT&T always did. She says, you're not dealing with AT&T.
If you miss dealing with AT&T, it's easier than ever to come back. Just call 1-800-622-3900 right now, and we'll switch you back for free.
They kept saying how much money I'd save. Then I get the first bill. I'm not kidding. I thought it was a typo. I mean, where were the big savings?
People who thought they could do better than AT&T are coming back for the real value. You can too. It's simple. Just call now and come back for free.
Takes longer getting through, but I'm saving a ton, right? Wrong.
You gotta read the fine print. I couldn't believe it.
You're not dealing with AT&T.
Oh, I am now.
1-800-622-3900 for dependable, crystal clear AT&T long-distance service. Call now and we'll switch you for free. You couldn't pick a better time to come back.
They call it puppy love. Those preteens are off at camp and some are discovering feelings of adolescent love. Some advice on how parents should deal with those emotions today on Sonia Live, 1 Eastern, 10 Pacific, on CNN.
It's the worst financial disaster since the Great Depression.
1 billion, 2 billion.
It's robbing Americans of homes and jobs.
10 million, 11 million, 12 million.
And money.
20 billion, 21 billion, 22.
Lots of money. Up to $500 billion by one official prediction. That's roughly $2,000 for every American. The savings and loan disaster. It isn't just a business page story anymore. It isn't only a political scandal. It's a fiscal Vietnam. Americans will be paying for this swamp of greed and waste for an entire generation. The S&L calamity is the story of an industry ruined by its own excess, taxpayers mugged by politicians, and a president, George Bush, burdened, crippled by the enormous waste he inherited.
In terms of the amount of money that we're allocating to this thing, President Bush deserves to be called the savings and loan president, not the environment president, not the education president, not the child care president, not the clean air president, but the savings and loan president.
What we're talking about here is a financial disaster that is bigger than all the disasters we've had in the last 30, 40 years.
The General Accounting Office says the S&L cleanup will cost at least $325 billion, including 30 years of interest payments. And it could easily cost $500 billion.
When I think of the needs of this country, education, transportation, housing, and I think about $200 or $300 billion going down a rat hole like this, I get incensed. I really get angry about it, and I think all of us should.
The wreckage is strewn from sea to sea. Once, this Atlantic beach forest was going to be a wildlife refuge, protected forever. Now the government may have to sell it to developers to raise cash. In Texas, taxpayers still are stuck with thousands of empty offices and stores that never should have been built. Most will be sold at big losses. Others may have to be demolished. In Colorado Springs, the government has become the biggest landlord. This ranch, now owned by the taxpayers, is bigger than the island of Manhattan. In Washington, a huge new bureaucracy is forming to dispose of the wreckage from the S&Ls. It's called the Resolution Trust Corporation. In effect, the biggest bank in the world, brimming with sour loans and repossessed real estate.
You have to go back to the Depression to find a disaster of this magnitude.
The tragedy is that the savings and loan industry was once a shining example of the good that government can do. The S&Ls were the good guys, run by heroes like Jimmy Stewart in the movie It's a Wonderful Life.
Enter the Martini Castle.
Government insured the savings of millions of small S&L depositors, making them safe from loss even if the S&L failed. S&Ls used that money to make mortgages, financing the American dream, home ownership. Construction boomed. America became a nation of homeowners, thanks in part to the S&Ls. It was a wonderful life for the S&Ls. They were regulated and coddled by Washington. Government limited the rates they paid to savers. It levied hardly any taxes on them, and it cushioned them from business competition from the banks. But the good times began to go bad in the 1970s. S&Ls began to fail the test of the marketplace. American home buyers found better sources of mortgage money. By 1983, the S&L's share of the mortgage market shrank from more than half to just 40%. And American savers found better places to put their money. Wall Street's new money market funds offered much higher interest rates and attracted more and more savers. In 1 year alone, 1981, more than $100 billion flowed into the money funds, much of it coming out of the S&Ls.
By 1980, a savings and loan, as we know it today and knew it in 1980, was an obsolete financial institution.
The killing blow to S&Ls was inflation. In President Jimmy Carter's term, prices soared. To control that runaway inflation, the government raised interest rates through the roof. The S&L's primary income came from mortgages with fixed rates lasting as long as 30 years. But their major expense was the deregulated interest they paid to savers. Those payments flowed out faster and faster as market rates soared, and that bled the S&Ls dry. The S&Ls lost billions. In just 2 years, its net worth, the industry's nest egg, if you will, had plunged from $31 billion to less than $4 billion. By 1982, the industry was nearly broke. But Washington didn't face the crisis squarely. Instead, it gambled, rolling the dice in the hope it could avoid billing taxpayers for a bailout. Congress passed sweeping new legislation, the Garn-St. Germain Act of 1982. It allowed S&Ls to get into all sorts of risky new businesses, and it had the full backing of the Reagan administration.
I think we hit the jackpot.
Well, Ken Bodie, was Reagan right? Was it a winner?
Brooks, the bill that President Reagan signed proved to be one of the biggest losers ever. S&Ls were allowed to pay much higher interest rates to attract investors. They were permitted to invest in anything they wanted to, from junk bonds to real estate speculation. High-flying investors were allowed to open an unlimited number of accounts in different S&Ls, up to $100,000 each, all guaranteed by the federal government and the taxpayers. High-stakes, high-risk investments, no risk to the investor. And overnight, the S&Ls became casinos.
It encouraged gambling. It encouraged a lousy operation. Now, these guys went from being in the business of making home loans to being in the business of making high-risk investments, and they were absolutely out of their league.
Bob Dietz, now business editor of the Dallas Times-Herald, was a witness to the greed.
Texas was on a roll. Oil prices were We're climbing to the $30 a barrel plus level. It was an attitude of spend, 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 accumulate, accumulate, development without end, pour the concrete.
And pour they did, throwing up buildings all over Dallas, all over the Sun Belt, on spec. No tenants, no promise of tenants. At one point, Dietz says, there was more empty office space in Dallas than there was total office space in Boston. Lavish mansions were built without concern as to who might buy them. This one listed at $8 million. Even churches were built on spec.
Some joker actually believed that if he built a church, that some denomination would come along and purchase it for him. So he built it for no particular denomination.
Many S&L operators lived in high style. Centrust's David Paul kept a yacht behind his Florida home. Inside the house, a $12 million Rubens, bought with Centrust funds. Vernon S&L's Don Dixon, now under indictment, built a multi-million-dollar beach house, paid for by Vernon Savings and Loan. To finance these luxuries, the S&L operators weren't using their own money. They were using federally insured deposits, and a lot of them were not honest.
We have found fraud or insider abuse in over 60% of all the S&Ls that we have taken over.
The Justice Department has S&L task forces operating in 27 cities across the country. The statute of limitations has been extended to give prosecutors time to make their cases.
How many of you are here today because you want to do business with the RTC in the way of consultant, appraiser?
The bailout of the S&L industry, empty buildings coast to coast, bad loans, thousands of them, will take years. The government is contracting this work out. Thousands of specialists will be needed.
Lawyers, accountants, appraisers, property managers, brokers, salesmen, and computer experts, you name it.
Already, there are 40,000 lawsuits to be settled. The bailout agency will spend $300 million a year on lawyers alone.
Resolution Trust Corporation, this is Aaron Green speaking. How may I help you?
RTC, the bailout agency, has several 800 numbers where you can find out about properties for sale in your area. Catalogs listing the real estate can be viewed at local Federal Deposit libraries. The first edition totals 4 volumes. Listings here of commercial businesses, houses, condos, office buildings, resorts and motels, and lots and lots and lots of undeveloped land, all held by the government and all waiting for someone to buy it. That's just what we know up to now. Over 600 S&Ls have already failed, but the government admits that may be only half the story.
As to the lower end of the industry, which, as I said, has gotten worse, I have no real positive message. I wish I did.
Over 600 more S&Ls are in trouble.
The bad here have gotten worse.
Probably will fail or are in danger of having to be bailed out. They're hearing so much about it these days because economists suspect the S&L crisis could begin to ripple through the economy.
I'm concerned about the future effect. Are you convinced that we're in a credit crunch now? Do we have...
The S&L crisis could help cause a credit crunch.
I'm very much interested in...
Could help cause higher interest rates.
For real estate credit.
And could help push us into a recession.
There's no question, at least in my mind, that there is some precautionary pulling back on the part of some commercial banks.
$4,000, $3,000 now for, $3,000 now for.
The next few months are critical.
Every dollar we raise tonight is a dollar that saves all of the taxpayers of America.
The government is planning to hold a fire sale to begin to get rid of some of the properties that are costing that $20 million a day.
$1,000 now to $2,000, $1,000 now to.
Meet Jim Gall, here auctioning off the holdings of a failed Louisiana bank. For Gall, this is a tune-up. Come September, he and his group will conduct what is being billed as the biggest auction in the history of the world.
Sold out $6,000.
One thing the auction will do is help establish the worth of those bailout properties on the open market. That'll be of special interest to places where the S&L crisis has hit the hardest. Like Colorado Springs, for example, where 3 of the 4 S&Ls in town have been taken over.
Next, Ken Bodie reports on one state where the S&L crisis has hit home.
Ask any 2 people to describe the New Yorker, and chances are you won't hear the same word twice. For those who want the intellect stirred, there's Pulitzer Prize-winning fiction. For those who want wit, there's humor and satire, plus the latest on music, art, dance, sports, and of course, the New Yorker's famous cartoons. Get 52 weekly issues of the New Yorker for just $25.95, 70% off the newsstand price, and get this brand new cartoon collection free with your paid subscription. Call 1-800-257-1257.
CNN Newsroom, a daily look in the classroom at world news as it unfolds.
Certainly every day I learn more than I would have if I hadn't had it. And maybe I'll be a more intelligent person.
Bring CNN Newsroom to your classroom. Call 1-800-344-6219.
Welcome to Colorado Springs. Ground zero in the savings and loan crisis. Inside the city limits here, the federal government controls 40% of the land. Everywhere you look, Colorado Springs is carpeted in real estate signs. Houses for sale, buildings for lease, space available. In Colorado as a whole, 22 S&Ls were seized by the government. $3 to $4 billion worth of assets to be sold off in this one state alone. The president's own son, Neil Bush, was a director of one of the failed S&Ls. Young Mr. Bush has been charged by the government with improper banking practices. Colorado's savings and loan heyday was a throwback to the gold rush. It started in the early 80s, when the shuttle Enterprise piggybacked into Peterson Air Force Base outside town. Developers, backed by savings and loan dollars, started dreaming of how money could be made off Ronald Reagan's expanded defense budget. S&Ls from all over the country invested in Colorado Springs, spending hundreds of millions of dollars, building shopping centers, office buildings, condominium projects. But now the boom is over. This 25,000-acre Banning Lewis Ranch, bought for development for $230 million, now is on the government's books. Nothing but grazing land for Colorado cows. The developer went broke, and in turn, so did the S&L that backed him. This was Otero Savings and Loan in Colorado Springs. Otero, seized by the government, had a special distinction: Western art.
We have sculptors, we have weavings, we have pottery.
$1 million worth of Western art, bought by the previous owner, used for decorations and promotions.
Appraisal price on this basket is about $6,000.
$6,000.
$6,000 to $8,000.
When Otero went into receivership, for a time, U.S. taxpayers owned that $1 million art collection. Then it was sold for the best offer available, $425,000, less than half the appraised value. We, the taxpayers, take the loss.
Move this line back so we can clear this door so it'll make it easier for you people to get in.
When Otero went bankrupt, depositors lined up to get their money back. All of it 100% federally insured with taxpayer dollars. So the government paid them $196 million of your money.
Come back and get my money and put it somewhere besides an S&L. That's for sure.
This amusement park, Ferris wheel and all, is another taxpayer-owned asset, on the block to be sold to the highest bidder. Once this amusement park was in the loan portfolio of Silverado Savings and Loan of Denver.
The top appraisal was at one time Silverado had it appraised at $9.6 million, I believe.
And if you were to buy it today, what would you buy it for?
I'd say it'll sell for between $800,000 and $1.2 million.
The Colorado situation illustrates the tension between federal and state officials. State officials worried that if the RTC sells off all those properties they're holding quickly, it will send real estate prices plummeting through the floor. And federal officials worried if they hold on, that $20 million a day price tag just keeps building. No easy answers, and no one wins. Tension focused on the more than 1,800 pieces of property the federal government holds, waiting to be sold.
Well, if they dump it, it'll knock the prices out from under Colorado real estate, and that is very, very difficult upon the whole of the economy.
We want to work with you and try to identify the issues.
Governor Romer has appointed a special task force to advise him on how to deal with the federal bailout agency.
I think we're sensitive to the markets.
Realtors, developers, local political leaders from towns and cities where S&Ls have failed.
1,000, thank you, now 1,500. We're at 1,000, now 15, we're at $1,500.
One of the things they worry about is that the government will just auction off all its holdings to the highest bidder.
We're at $1,500, 1,000, now $1,500.
That after going too slow on the bailout for the first year and a half, the administration will begin to go too fast.
Final call. Sold out right back I don't there. like it at all. I don't like it at all. Congratulate them there, Ron. You know, it's not very much fun to have the federal government in here with that kind of an investment, with that kind of a problem.
In fact, the federal policy is to sell as quickly as possible and to sell at bargain prices. The object is to stop the $20 million a day it's costing the taxpayers to hold on to these properties.
We have yet to find the first person that wants to buy these properties out of a sense of patriotism. We have to offer them a bargain in order for them to be willing to buy them.
But for now, everybody is losing, especially the taxpayer. Silverado of Denver, one of the highest flying S&Ls in the country. When Silverado crashed just after the election of 1988, it cost the taxpayers a cool $1 billion. Government documents say that Silverado failed because of fraud and abuse, hiding its loan problems from federal regulators, posting false profits, and paying its top executives millions of dollars in salaries.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee...
The officers and board of Silverado claim the failure was caused by a downturn in the Colorado economy.
I don't think it was mismanagement or fraud or corruption or any evil out there that you might be looking for.
Well, let me ask, can I
so the
just,
point is there was a devastating collapse of the real estate business.
That was Neil Bush, who joined the Silverado Board of Directors in 1985 at age 30, with no prior banking experience. The institution already was in trouble, and his father was the vice president.
Now, there might be some speculation that because I was the son of the vice president, which might be why you're smiling, that I was included, and perhaps that's true. I don't want to be naive in saying that that might not have been a factor. But they never asked me to use influence with that regard.
Bush has said that he considered serving on the board of Silverado an opportunity to learn about banking. But investigators have charged that while learning, Neil Bush found himself in a couple of situations involving conflicts of interest.
I think the people who were involved with Silverado were involved in some very fishy deals.
Fishy is the word. Highest profile is Neil Bush. A man named Kenneth Good loaned Bush $100,000 to invest in a high-risk deal. Bush says if the investment didn't pay off, the loan from Good didn't have to be paid back. It was just for free.
I know it sounds a little fishy, but I've heard this happen before, and the loan was never meant to be repaid in the case that there wasn't a success. There was no success, so the loan was forgiven.
However, as director of Silverado, Neil Bush promoted a $900,000 line of credit for Mr. Good. Federal examiners call that a conflict of interest. Bush is fighting the charge.
There wasn't a conflict of interest ever between my relationship with King Good and my relationship with Silverado.
Bush also sold a small share of his oil and gas company to William Walters, a Denver real estate developer, for $150,000. But Neil Bush did not disclose that business relationship when he voted to approve Silverado loans of $106 million to Walters. Walters defaulted. Now taxpayers are responsible for those loans.
About a partner of yours. Was he not a partner of yours?
What, Mr. Walters? Yeah, he was a passive, limited partner.
Call it what you want. He was still a partner.
He was a partner in my business, but I wasn't a partner in any of his businesses, and so there was absolutely no conflict.
Is Neil Bush getting all this attention because he's the son of the president? Of course. But he wouldn't have been put on the board of a high-flying savings and loan in the first place had he not then been the son of the vice president. In October of 1988, the final days of the presidential campaign, Colorado regulators wanted to close Silverado, the S&L on whose board Neil Bush served. But from Washington, somebody sent a message: delay it. So one day after George Bush was elected president, the order to close Silverado came down, and the taxpayers will pay $1 billion. How the Neil Bush matter is resolved remains to be seen. Thrift regulators say he engaged in, quote, the worst kinds of conflict of interest, and the president's son must face a public disciplinary hearing in Denver in September. Neil Bush admits that he got what he calls an incredibly sweet deal, but still denies he did anything wrong. The president's son obviously has become a public symbol of the entire S&L mess, the case that most Americans know best.
Next, Brooks Jackson with a brief update on an S&L story Americans know less well.
Good morning, I'm Barry Judge at the CNN Center in Atlanta with a brief look at the news this hour. George Steinbrenner says he's satisfied with a decision that strips his control of the New York Yankees. Baseball Commissioner Fay Vincent last night forced Mr. Steinbrenner to step down as primary owner because of his dealings with an admitted gambler. Fans of the Bronx Bombers also appear satisfied. They gave a new kind of Bronx cheer, a 90-second standing ovation, when the word about Steinbrenner reached Yankee Stadium. There's word of an accord in the bloody coup attempt in Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister, Arthur Robinson, says he's agreed to relinquish power and grant amnesty to the Muslim rebels holding him and several cabinet members captive. Smoke is pouring from the TV station controlled by the rebels, but the air is also filled with uncertainty. The nation's information officer says that he isn't aware of the agreement, and sources say the police commissioner will reject it. A Florida man is facing a possible death penalty for killing his 2-year-old stepson by dunking the boy in a toilet. 23-year-old Thomas Coe was convicted of murder last night. Coe said he went out of control while punishing the boy for soiling his pants. His wife is serving a 30-year term for her part in that crime. Congress is moving to help you pull the plug on unwanted sales telephone calls and so-called junk fax messages. The House last night passed legislation aimed at computer-driven calls and fax advertisements. The bill would set up a national registry of people who don't want to receive any such messages. Similar legislation is now moving through the Senate. An estimated 180,000 telemarketing operators phone more than 7 million Americans every day. That's a quick look at the news this morning. I'm Barry Judge in Atlanta.
We'll return in a moment with S&Ls, the full story.
Crime Stoppers pays for information leading to the arrest or indictment of wanted criminals. You can make this area a safer place to live. Call Crime Stoppers at 436-STOP or 1-800-237-STOP. You don't have to give your name.
Make the call that pays, Crime Stoppers.
Approximately 1/2 of all fire department runs are medical assist runs. When our firefighters arrive on the scene, fast and accurate information is vital.
Elder Alert gives our agencies information such as doctors' names and a brief medical history. Just fill out the information form, place in the tube, and attach to the refrigerator shelf. Taking this action could save your life.
Pick up your Elder Alert protection system today. They're for all ages and any member of your family.
And absolutely free.
Celebrating 10 years of growth,
This is CNN.
The savings and loan disaster, a massive dark cloud for taxpayers, but blue skies for Bluebonnet Savings of Dallas. Bluebonnet received $223 million in federal subsidies last year. Bluebonnet's owner is this man, Jim Fale, an insurance man. His S&L will get the subsidies for 10 years, a total of $3.4 billion. Washington regulators sold Bluebonnet to Jim Fale in 1988 when they were desperate to get rid of bankrupt S&Ls. But as CNN first reported in this S&L series, Jim Fale is a man with a questionable past. Federal regulators granted high subsidies to Mr. Fale's Bluebonnet savings, even though they knew that in 1976 he had been indicted for fraud in Alabama. Mr. Fale entered a guilty plea on behalf of one of his companies and got the charges against himself dropped only by agreeing never to sell insurance in Alabama again. Currently, Mr. Fale is having problems with state insurance regulators in California, Indiana, Iowa, Nevada, Maryland, Missouri, and elsewhere. Recently, CNN also has uncovered a pattern of cozy deals in which Mr. Fale has reshuffled funds from his insurance companies to finance personal business ventures, such as an executive jet like this one, kept in this Scottsdale, Arizona hangar, this suburban Atlanta shopping center, this Oklahoma City bank, this 20,000-acre vacation home development in North Georgia, and $35 million for Bluebonnet Savings itself. State regulators say such personal use of insurance funds can drain insurance companies of assets, possibly lead to their collapse and to losses for insurance customers. Still, Mr. Fale says he's done nothing wrong and that everything is legal and above board. The savings and loan mess was created because Washington let high-flying businessmen speculate with money insured by the taxpayers. But Jim Fale, whose Bluebonnet Savings is getting $3.4 billion in federal subsidies, may be something of a high flyer himself.
Next, Ken Bodie on the administration's responsibility for the S&L crisis.
Do I know the ins and outs of track and field, swimming, or gymnastics? No. But I know what makes people tick. And my job at the Goodwill Games isn't to analyze an athlete's performance. We have plenty of experts who will do that and more. I see my job as doing what I feel I do best, asking the right question, getting inside the person, trying to feel what they're feeling. It's what I do every day. It's what turns me on. It's what's really exciting about my role in these games.
Want an adjustable bed, but don't think you can afford one? Then you haven't priced Craftmatic adjustable beds lately. Craftmatic Model 2 beds cost hundreds less than these quality flat beds. And this Craftmatic Model 3 is available at 50% of Craftmatic 2's low cost. 50%. Craftmatic Model 3 and 2 beds adjust to all these healthful positions and offer optional heat and massage, yet cost less than these quality flat beds. Get our free catalog by mail, including information on Craftmatic 3s at savings of 50% of Craftmatic 2's low cost.
Hello, I'd like to receive your free catalog and 50% information by mail.
Certainly, sir.
It's easy, so call for this free catalog right away.
Call 1-800-BED-9978. That's 1-800-BED-9978. Toll free. Call 1-800-BED-9978.
No one knows when news will strike. But if you are there and you get it on tape, CNN wants to show it to the world. See it, shoot it, send it to CNN NewsHound. Call 1-800-544-NEWS.
Welcome aboard, kid. You just got here, and already you owe the government about $2,000. So do each of your brothers and sisters, and Mom and Dad.
Daddy, too.
That's your family's share of the cost of the savings and loan bailout. But if it's a burden for families, it's also a burden on the president. The S&L crisis could be this administration's Achilles heel. There's more publicity about it every day. There are more sick thrifts, more are dying, the costs are going up all the time, and there's no real reform in sight. George Bush was in on the takeoff, and he's certainly in on the crash landing. Deregulation was the byword of the Reagan-Bush administration, and one of George Bush's first assignments as vice president was the Deregulation Task Force.
We welcome deregulation, but if you're going to do it, you've got to do it intelligently. You've got to strengthen supervision, which we didn't do.
There were too few rules and too few supervisors. The man in charge of watching the S&Ls in those days tried to warn President Reagan there was trouble ahead. But Ed Gray couldn't get past the famous gatekeeper, Chief of Staff Don Regan.
Don Regan conducted a campaign of guerrilla warfare against me virtually the whole time I was there.
Had the crisis been addressed in the early years, it could have been remedied by the Reagan-Bush administration for a lot less money.
Our estimate in 1984 was that we could have cleaned up all of the problems in the S&L industry at a cost of $10 to $15 billion.
Now it will cost 20 or 30 times that much, or more. The size and scope of this crisis should have been known during the 1988 presidential campaign. But Michael Dukakis never mentioned it.
He had potentially a very powerful issue, and he didn't even recognize it or didn't have the fortitude to pursue it.
And of course, George Bush never mentioned it either. In fact, he made his famous promise.
Read my lips. No new taxes. You are not paying too little in taxes.
A promise completely inconsistent with a strong policy on the S&Ls. To have addressed the S&L problem directly, immediately, and on budget would have meant a tax increase. Still does. So when Bush arrived at the White House, waiting for him was the crisis that will be with him his entire presidency.
Proud to sign this monster.
The president's signature created the Resolution Trust Corporation, RTC. This bailout legislation created a bureaucratic nightmare. Look at this organization chart. So George Bush has created the newest, largest, almost unfathomably complicated federal bureaucracy to re-regulate the thrifts and manage the bailout. As more and more savings and loans have closed, critics have charged the administration not only with excessive red tape, but also with moving too slowly. They cite S&Ls allowed to remain open after they became insolvent. One study indicates that added $42 billion to the cost. Another point of criticism, understating the problem. The administration always has lowballed the total cost. Its estimates are based on current costs, pay it now, no interest included. Listen to Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady.
Our estimate of the amount of money that will be required is in a range of $89 billion to $132 billion.
However, if you include all the interest, and the U.S. taxpayers will have to pay the interest, well, here's the estimate of the head of the General Accounting Office.
People who are making the estimates today as much as $500 or $500 billion, that could be possible, unfortunately.
Well, I think the country would be very fortunate if the effects of this, including the borrowings, are over in the next 15 or 20 years.
William Seidman is suspected of being too candid about the size of the problem.
Close to $200 billion.
So he's being forced out of his job.
Seidman is, Seidman's the only guy who's been honestly assessing it, and you see what happened to him. He's out the door.
President Bush has not proposed the kinds of reforms needed to be sure this kind of fraud and abuse can't happen again. Deposits are still insured 100% up to $100,000. Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady.
I think a discussion on that matter is germane at some point in time. I wouldn't suggest we started in the middle of an S&L rescue program.
Fraud also is a major problem for the Bush administration.
We have found fraud or insider abuse in over 60% of all the S&Ls that we have taken over.
And Americans are beginning to ask, if there was so much of it, Why are we taxpayers picking up the bill, and why are so few going to jail? But Bush's Justice Department may be overwhelmed. There are so many cases that could be prosecuted. So the next strategy is to go for the big ones first.
We have provided the Attorney General with a consolidated and prioritized list of our top 20 criminal referrals.
Most of these individuals are very shrewd businessmen.
Prosecutors say it's difficult to persuade a jury that respected citizens, known for civic service and charitable contributions, should be sent to prison for fraud. Not everyone accepts that argument.
These guys can rip off hundreds of millions of dollars, and because they put a few bucks into the community, they're off the hook. And I say rubbish to that.
There have been some prosecutions, especially in Texas, where the S&L scandal first surfaced. The Justice Department has asked for more money for more prosecutors, and the statute of limitations has been extended. But Attorney General Richard Thornburgh admits they won't even prosecute all the major cases. Speaking for the administration, Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady disagrees with most of those criticisms.
An orderly, steady, calm approach to this problem is the one that we should follow, and it's the president's program.
Despite that expression of confidence, the savings and loan crisis is looming as perhaps George Bush's biggest political problem.
If this administration does a bad job on this, by far the largest expenditure, new expenditure of this administration, it is going to be a political problem.
Until recently, Bush has been lucky. 70% plus poll ratings, watching the Soviet empire unravel. The public hasn't decided yet who to blame for the S&Ls. But the free ride may be over. The budget summit and the S&L crisis forced George Bush to ease out of his famous promise of no new taxes. Democrats finally are taking aim, especially those who are potential candidates against George Bush in 1992.
I am not going to spend any time on savings and loans. I'm not going to do that cheaply. No, God forbid, because...
New York Governor Mario Cuomo, emerging as one of the president's most vocal critics.
$500 billion. $500 billion. These geniuses, these conservatives who believe that what you have to do is deregulate. Are you sure? Yes. Take the regulations off. Let these bankers do what they want to do. Terrific. What did they do? They stole everything in sight. They fouled up everything in sight.
They ought to be thinking, what if I spent $20 billion a year in American schools? Do they? What if I put $20 billion a year in America's roads and infrastructure? What if I put $20 billion a year into poverty programs? What would happen to America 10 years from now?
The savings and loan crisis is emerging as tomorrow's political issue. The situation will be with us for a long time, and it has potential of bringing us more and more bad news. Higher interest rates, a credit crunch, a tax increase, and even possibly a recession. It's possible that by 1992, voters will decide that some politician needs to bear responsibility for all this, and the logical candidate is George Bush.
Next, Brooks Jackson and the culpability of the United States Congress in the S&L scandal.
Has this ever happened to you? What a mess. This shirt and blouse have had it. Or have they? Now there's a simple way to deal with the most difficult stains. DD7, a super concentrated formula that removes stains but won't harm fabrics. Now where's the ink? Delicate silk? Incredibly clean. Tar, iodine, blood, rust. DD7 gets rid of them all. Dull gray window shears restored to a like-new whiteness thanks to a soak in DD7, a whiz on carpets, and upholstery. We've stained these hands with ink, iodine, and car grease. DD7 and a little water removes the stain instantly, even under the fingernails. Imagine this as your washing machine. Dye from a red sock, ink, and iodine. A little DD7 in the final rinse, and goodbye to unwanted stains. Order DD7 today for just $14.95, or we'll double your order for only $5 more. That's 2 tubes for only $19.95. If DD7 doesn't work this quickly and easily for you, simply return the unused portion for a refund. Have your credit card ready and order now.
Call toll free, 1-800-241-6600. That's 1-800-241-6600. Or send $14.95 for one tube, or save $10 by sending $19.95 for two tubes, plus $4 shipping to DD7, Box 8990-M, Buffalo Grove, Illinois. That's DD7, Box 8990-M, Buffalo Grove, Illinois.
The savings and loan industry has been looted. It's the biggest bank robbery in history. Hundreds of billions of dollars gone. The disaster has Congress in an uproar.
These guys ought to be behind bars as quickly as possible.
Do we have order, please?
But some congressmen helped bring you the S&L crisis in the first place. Martin Frost, a Democrat.
The American public wants people who have fraud and savings and loans brought to justice and wants restitution made.
Steve Bartlett, a Republican.
No one should be allowed to stay in the business if they're guilty of any kind of insider fraud and abuse.
Tough talk from Congressman Bartlett, and Congressman Frost strikes Edwin Gray as worse than ironic.
To be honest with you, it is, in my view, rank hypocrisy.
When Gray was the S&L's chief regulator, Texas lawmakers called him in to complain that examiners were too tough. Congressman Frost was there, so was Congressman Bartlett.
Congressman Bartlett had great problems with the way the regulatory operation was going after Texas thrift. I mean, really, it was no different. You could be Democrat or Republican. It didn't make any difference at all.
In 1987, Bartlett, a Republican, joined forces with Democratic Majority Leader Jim Wright. Congressman Bartlett helped push through a banking amendment calling for regulators to show forbearance, to delay foreclosing on weak S&Ls.
That's basically what he was talking about, forbearance, so that their friends in Texas who happen to be S&L operators would be freed from the heavy hand of the regulator, let's put it that way.
Congress ought to be outraged at the S&L fiasco. It's become a $500 billion fiscal Vietnam. But it was Congress that called the shots and ignored the warnings at practically every step on the road to disaster.
A lot of these S&L operators had a lot of money that they could give to the Congress, and they did give it. And they were listened to.
In 1979, William Isaac tried to warn Congress against increasing the maximum size of insured deposits to $100,000. It was then only $40,000. But the S&L lobbyists won.
The Congress, in the middle of the night, no hearings on the subject or nothing, just in the middle of the night, cut a deal in committee to take the limit to $100,000. It was a terrible mistake.
Less than 3 years later, Congress deregulated the S&L industry with the enthusiastic support of President Reagan.
I particularly want to commend the leadership of Chairman Senator Garn, Chairman St. Germain.
The sweeping new Garn-St. Germain Act freed the S&L industry to enter a new and very risky world. Mammoth real estate development, exotic securities. The idea was to generate profits that would save the S&L industry from bankruptcy. But too many S&Ls started gambling for big stakes using chips supplied by the taxpayers. The S&Ls financed an orgy of reckless spending on speculation. Developers bought S&Ls to use as personal piggy banks.
By air, we located another large condominium project, virtually completed, hundreds of units, and by ground, we found none occupied.
But Congress repeatedly ignored warnings, like this 1984 video, that something was going very, very wrong.
A large project, high density, virtually complete, no occupancy.
This video was taken by a government consultant to document how Empire Savings of Texas expanded too rapidly and collapsed. Ed Gray recalls his shock at seeing the waste that video showed.
As I looked at it, I actually became so embarrassed. It was like an X-rated movie.
The government eventually had to demolish scores of apartments financed by Empire. Besides the sheer waste, there was massive fraud. So far, more than 100 persons have been convicted. A major congressional investigation of Empire in 1984 might have headed off future S&L scandals. Ed Gray tried to get just such an investigation started.
I was so concerned about this that I asked the chairman of the House Banking Committee and his staff to view this videotape.
Committee will come to order. CNN has learned that Chairman Fernand St. Germain and his House Banking Committee staff did prepare to investigate. But then the chairman canceled the inquiry. Perhaps that's because the chairman would have been investigating his own campaign contributors. St. Germain got $6,000 from the following Texas S&L figures just 2 weeks before seeing the Empire video. One of them, developer Jim Toller, was later indicted in the Empire Savings case. The money was collected by Tom Gobert. He was an owner of Independent American Savings, which also collapsed. Besides those campaign funds, CNN has learned that Gobert, in the 6 months before Empire collapsed, gave his friend St. Germain 2 free trips aboard this executive jet. Plane logs show they traveled together. Dallas to Washington, October 25th, 1983, and Washington to Tampa, Florida, February 2nd, 1984. Perhaps the most aggressive in protecting the savings and loan owners was Jim Wright. First as Democratic Majority Leader and later as Speaker of the House, he demanded special treatment for his S&L friends, including Tom Gobert. Gobert raised big money for Wright and the Democratic Party, much of it aboard this 110-foot yacht, the High Spirits. Regulators forced Gobert out of the S&L industry. Wright tried to get him reinstated and was angry when Chief Regulator Ed Gray refused.
The Congress as a whole had been bought lock, stock, and barrel by the savings and loan industry.
In 1985, Wright solicited donations for a special fund called East Texas First. Gobert collected the money, $100,000. Of the donors, 9 have been convicted of federal crimes in the S&L scandal. Among them, John Harrell. Back then, S&L executive John Harrell was among those Wright favored with a smile, a handshake, and a souvenir photo from the High Spirits yacht. Harrell is now serving a 5-year term in federal prison for making illegal political donations to the Wright Fund, among others.
I made a lot of mistakes. Mistakes in judgment? Oh, yeah. A lot of them.
Harrell testified that Wright talked to S&L executives about both money and troublesome legislation. Harrell denied that Wright promised to kill the bill, yet according to Harrell, Wright did say he would, quote, do whatever he could to help the savings and loan industry. The bill was killed, buried in the House Rules Committee by, among others, Martin Frost, a close political ally of Jim Wright. Frost himself, the same Texas congressman now demanding action against the S&Ls, took in $18,500 from Texas S&L figures.
The root of this, I believe, is raw political power. The S&Ls, particularly some of the highest flying S&Ls, were making huge political contributions.
Do we have order, please?
The S&L scandal has rocked Congress. Jim Wright resigned last year. Chairman St. Germain was defeated for re-election in 1988. And the Democratic whip of the House, Congressman Tony Coelho of California, also resigned over his failure to report a $50,000 personal loan from a California S&L. Now 5 senators, dubbed the Keating Five, are under investigation by the Senate Ethics Committee. They are Alan Cranston of California, Dennis DeConcini of Arizona, John Glenn of Ohio, Senate Banking Committee Chairman Don Regal of Michigan, and John McCain of Arizona. The reason for the inquiry? They intervened with Chief Regulator Ed Gray on behalf of S&L mogul Charles Keating. He arranged for a total of $1.4 million in political gifts for the 5 senators. He now faces civil charges of a $1 billion fraud from the collapse of his S&L, Lincoln Savings of California. The Keating Five say they were just representing business constituents, but critics say Congress was just too cozy with the S&L industry. William Isaac.
It's clear they were protecting the industry, and were not concerned about the taxpayers, the general public, or we wouldn't have a $300 billion loss.
Lots of legislators, instead of identifying with the little guy, came to identify with the head of the savings and loan.
When Congress first insured the deposits of small savers in the depths of the Great Depression, it did so to protect the ordinary citizen against the ravages of a broken business system. But now it is the political system that is broken. The soaring cost of campaigning is paid for mostly by special interest groups, such as the S&Ls, while turned-off citizens practically boycott elections. The S&L debacle, bad as it is merely a symptom. The deeper problem is a Congress that depends on, and too often responds to, special interest money. I'm Brooks Jackson, CNN Special Assignment.
What are you going to do tonight?
What about that great movie? Oh, but that's good too. Wait a minute. How about that TV show? She might like that one. I know. I'll pick up a video.
Which one? I don't know.
I've got it! No, I don't.
So, what are you going to do tonight? Got any suggestions? Sure. The magazine that makes it easy to know what to do tonight. Entertainment Weekly. It's new from the publishers of Time, People, and Sports Illustrated. And it's the only magazine that covers it all. Movies, video, TV, music, books, and even kids' entertainment. The only magazine that cuts through the confusion of today's entertainment choices. So you can pick a winner every time. Call now to start with 4 free issues. That's a whole month's worth of great entertainment free.
That's terrific.
And in each and every issue, all the week's hottest entertainment is graded for you by a team of the country's most discriminating critics. So in seconds, you can find the best entertainment every day of the week.
Hey, this is exactly what I need.
That's 4 free issues of the one magazine that shows you how to get the most out of your free time. And that will save you time and money when it comes to choosing the best entertainment.
Sounds good to me. Tell me what I should do again?
Call now to become a charter subscriber. Then you'll get 30 more issues, billed in 3 monthly installments of just $9.89 each. That's almost 50% off the cover price. If you don't like it, just cancel. The 4 free issues are yours to keep.
Hey, I know what we should do tonight.
Call now for 4 free issues.
If you would like information on this or any other story produced by CNN Special Assignment staff, write to this address, CNN Special Assignment, Post Office Box 2727, Atlanta, Georgia 30301.